Hey everyone, welcome to the studio. It is demo day and today I'm going to demonstrate rocks and this time I'm going to demonstrate some rocks in water. So some of you have said, oh, I want to see rocks in water, I want to see water going over rocks. Now we did a waterfall last year and I'll link to that video here in the comments. But today I want to do more of a calm stream where there's just a little bit of turbulence as some rocks move over the water. And if we can look at the reference photo that I'll be working with, it's more of an intimate landscape. We don't have trees or sky, so it's really going to be kind of a portrait of these rocks and water, and I may not actually include quite as much of this foreground area. And this area here, let's look at this because we talked about this last month. You see how this grass kind of cuts off the corner? Now it does come across the scene a little bit more than a direct corner, but I have to be careful of that. I think I'm going to add a few more rocks instead of having it like a manicured lawn, because the manicured lawn doesn't fit with the natural wildness of the scene. So that's where I'm headed, I think. So I want to review those 6 steps that will help us paint stronger rocks. And remember, what we want to do is we want to look at the shape of the rocks. Are they rounded? Are they square? Box shape? Are they cylinders? Where's the light source coming from? What are the planes of the rocks? Do they have tops, sides, and bottoms? Assign a value to those planes, start layering with color, and then finally refine the rocks, but not every single rock. Especially here, we have a big, not a big area, but we have an area of a lot of different size rocks. And this is common when you're painting rocks, but we don't want to pull our hair out trying to analyze the photo and draw in every single one. It's kind of like when we paint flowers in a field. If we can mass in some of the rocks and then just kind of define a few of them, our brain will fill in the rest of the detail. So we're going to do some massing here and not try to nitpick and draw every single rock. Alright, so these are the steps we're going to take. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pastel pencil. This is a piece of sanded paper, a nice gray tone. It's the Ming Art. They had changed the name of it, so I couldn't really think of it. The Ming Art paper. Okay, let's see. So we don't want to have our stream dead in the middle, so I'll make a little mark. So we're either going to pull the rocks below it or above it. I think we'll go with above. And we've got this one big rock, and it's got a nice kind of rectangular shape. So I'm going to draw him in there first. I'm just going to hint at some of these. Remember I said I just want to probably put some more rocks over here and less green grass, try to make it a little bit more natural. So I'm kind of looking at these rocks just to give me an idea of the planes, like where's the top, where's the side, where's the bottom. We want a variety of shapes and sizes. Let's talk about, before I go much further, where's the light coming from? And I feel like the light is coming somewhere from the right hand side. You see there's some light, and then the side is in shadow. It's dappled light because there's probably some big trees over on this bank, so it's creating more of a dappled light, whereas these guys are in full sun, so it's obvious that the light is actually coming from up here. And I might go ahead and not make it quite as dappled. Now here's where the water is going to come over. This is my little waterfall. And then at the other side, we've got this nice kind of flat looking rock that's kind of peeking over the waterfall, the edge, creating a little bit more variety in the water. And then here's where we have a mass of rocks. Okay, so I'm going to just make this one big shape of rocks. And then I will come in and define them a little bit further. So then back here we have our water. Water always has to be straight and level. And I think I'll put a couple of these rocks that are in sun. And all of this stuff up here is the green foliage. And because this is an intimate portrait of rocks, I'm going to just make this a mass of green. All right, and then here's our water. We've got some shadows, looks like from the tree, and then there's a few other rocks kind of sticking out. But there's some fun things going on in here, and we have little pebbles that we can see under the water, and that'll be interesting to paint. All right, so there's my drawing. So here we have our shape of the rocks. We know where our light source is. Let's go ahead and make this yellow so we remember. The planes, we have established planes on some of the rocks, not this particular mass. I'll get to that. Now we're going to assign each plane a value as well as the rest of the painting. So in order to do that, I'm going to use a dark, a light, and a middle value pastel. So let's begin with the dark. So the dark is going to be anything that's in the shadow side. So this part of this big rock is in the shadow, especially right under it. These rocks here, right on the edge, are all in the shadows. I'm going to mass them together. These rocks are not getting sunlight. All of this is in the shadow. This is in the shadow of these rocks that are kind of sticking up out of the water. These little rocks that are in the grass. I'm gonna actually darken this foreground area just a little bit. Whereas it also in shadow, the rocks that form that waterfall are not getting full sun, so I'm going to put that in shadow, but I'm actually using a lighter touch there. This flat rock over here is mostly in the shadow. And now here we get to this area. I gotta flatten this guy out a little bit. This area where we have this whole jumble of rocks. If I squint at it, the majority of these rocks are in the shadow and they're just getting some of that dappled light. So I'm going to block in most of it with dark. These rocks are in the light. All of the foliage I'm going to darken. I'm using it, by the way, this is a dark blue number 305 Spruce Blue NuPastel. So here we have all our dark shapes. Now look what's happening with the dark shapes. Do you see how all the dark shapes kind of work their way to the back? They're all connected. And so that will help make this into hopefully a stronger composition. Instead of having spot, 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 and being too analytical about all the little spots of light and dark, I've masked the darks in a little bit more. Now, where is the rocks and the water, for that matter, getting light? I'm going to use the lightest value I have. So we have the top of this rock is getting light, a little bit off to the side. Some of these rocks in the grass are getting some light. This guy over here, this guy over here. Some of these rocks over in the jumble, maybe the corner of the flat rock. Definitely these guys over here in the background. I'm going to hold on to that. So we've got our darkest dark, this is our light, and now this one is a slightly darker value of the peachy color. And you might be saying, well, why did you choose a peachy color? That's because I want to give the light areas of the rocks a little warmth. But you could have easily done this with shades of blue or gray. I'm going to add some of this middle value on some of these other rocks just to give a little bit of variety where they have a little bit of a transition. So they're not completely light and they're not completely dark. They have 3 values. Now, what about the water? Now, here's an interesting thing. How do you paint when you can see the water, when you can see to the bottom? What you do is you're going to paint what's on the bottom first. So if I see pebbles underneath the water, I'm going to put those in first. So I'm using this middle dark value to kind of hint at some of those little pebbles. There's a bit of other light rock sticking up. Okay, this seems weird right now, but hopefully it's going to come together and you'll see what I mean. Now, I'm going to continue with this underpainting, and I'm going to still use some of the harder pastels. And the water has a lot of a green tint to it. So just for the sake of the underpainting, I am blocking in some of those. That should be a little bit more yellowy. I had a really good question from someone today, and they wanted to know oh gosh, what did they want to know? Oh, they wanted to know how come on some of my demos I go right to the hard pastels and sometimes I go right to the soft pastels. You know, is there any real rule about when you should switch over between hard and soft? I thought that was a great question, because you know, you could really paint an entire painting with your hard pastels. And the main reason that I use hard pastels in these beginning layers is so that I can have the ability to create more layers, because the harder the pastel, the less quickly they fill up the tooth of the paper. I'm just darkening, just reinforcing my darks before I move on. So basically I could get carried away, and this is the blocking or the underpainting, but I could actually paint the whole painting with these hard pastels. I'm going to take the next step and use a piece of pipe insulation foam and blend in this first layer that I just applied, just so that I can have a nice soft dreamy underpainting to respond to. And one thing that you want to do is blend things in the direction that stuff is growing or going. So what do I mean by that? In the distance, I want level horizontal water. So this is how I blend it in. When the water goes over the waterfall, I want it to go over the waterfall. So I make my strokes as if I was water tumbling over the waterfall. The water in this calm part also needs to be horizontal. So I'll put those in horizontal. Grasses are more upright, so I'm going to blend them in like this. So why do I do that? It just kind of helps me feel my way through the painting, and your marks help describe what it is you're painting. So think about the way you apply the pastel. All right, so now we're going to move on to the softer pastels, and I want to show my tray here. Have a look at those. I'm going to grab a drink of water. I pre-selected this palette. I may not use every single pastel here. It's a variety of mostly Terry Ludwig pastels. I picked a few colorful darks. These colors I'm going to use probably for the rocks. This for the green stuff and the water, which is very green. This is for the light areas, the sunlit areas. These are for accent and highlights. Alright, so These are what I use for the underpainting. Yeah. I don't know if I took a picture. I want to take a picture of this before I mess it up, because once I mess it up, you'll never be able to see them in this way again. Alright, so let's move on. So what am I going to do now? I'm going to simply reinforce the darks. I'm going to go in, and wherever I put dark, I'm going to take a dark blue hard pastel and reinforce those dark areas. And immediately I can see with the softer pastel how goes on like butter on the paper. So, you know, you can see this really can quickly fill in the tooth of the paper. So this is why I started with the harder sticks first. Here's where the water goes over. There's some rocks under there. There's this big flat rock that has a shadow shape underneath. Now remember, we have all this mass of small rocks. I'm going to just reinforce the dark areas, reinforce the shadows at the bank, and then block in the foliage. Even though it's going to be green, I'm going to block it in with this dark blue to begin with. What about the foreground? I just need to give some shadows to some of these rocks. And I'm just going to just darken this foreground area. That's one layer of dark. So I like to build up my layers of dark with multiple colors. So I've taken this really dark value reddish brown and going over those areas there where I just put blue. Why? So that I can get more than one layer of color. And you might be saying, wait a minute, Karen, you just covered up all of your underpainting where you put the light areas. Why are you doing that? Well, it's hard to keep everything. I find if I try to keep everything just the way I had it in the underpainting, I might end up making everything too precious. So if I make a few changes here and there, it's not going to hurt anything. All right, 2 layers. Let's add a third layer of dark value, and I'm going to add a dark violet this time. Why? Because I see a lot of kind of purplish tones and yellow tones in the rocks, so I know purple will work well with it. So I want to establish some of that purple in the shadowed areas. All right, I think that's enough for our darks. Now, before I move on to the other values, I'm going to look and I'm going to see if there's any areas where it's darker than the darkest shadowed area. In other words, underneath the rocks, you can see that it's really quite dark. So I'm using the darkest value pastel that I have, which for me is a Terry Ludwig eggplant, and I'm just putting them in. I could put these in at the end, you know, where we call them accents, and I probably will need to reinforce them at the end of the painting, but I'm just going to establish them now just so that I know that I want to have this really rich dark in the underneath some of these rocks, make the shadows really rich. I've got to be careful of this guy here. It's starting to look a little bit like a flattened potato, so I want to watch the shape of that guy as I go forward. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do now is we need to layer the 3 values. So I already did the dark. Now let's go to the middle value color for the rocks, and I'm going to use a middle value purple. This is a dull violet, kind of a grayed down color. And remember, this is just a jumble of rocks, so I'm not really concerned with showing a lot of detail in those rocks right now. I'll pick out a few as this painting progresses. What about the rocks that are in the water? They could use a little bit of this middle value. There's another guy closer to the spillover. What about the guys in the back? Maybe just a hint of it. Alright, so that's one layer of the middle value. Let's go with another layer. Let's go with a blue-gray. These rocks, remember, we can really use any color we want as long as it's the same value. And I see this kind of blue-gray in some of these rocks. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, Well, I don't see the colors that you see. You're telling me that you're seeing these colors and I don't happen to see them. Well, it's a known fact that everyone sees color a little bit differently. Scientific fact about that. So yeah, it's true. You probably may not see the same colors that I do. But if you don't, but you still want to play with color and have more unusual, unexpected color, this idea that you can build up your color by value can really serve a really good purpose, because if I can build up layers of color within each dark, middle, and light section, I can get away with unusual color combinations, and it will work just because the values are correct. And that's really one of the keys to the way I paint, is building up my colors by getting the correct value within each area. So while I've been talking, what I've done is I've picked up a middle value, I don't even know what you'd call that, a brownish red middle value, and I've gone over the areas where I've put the blue-gray, but I try not to cover up all the blue-gray, and I'm trying to make chunky marks to say, hey, this is a rock. Actually, while I'm at it, I'm going to add that might be too light. I need to add a little bit more rock where the water is going to go over. So what we're going to be doing is we are going to be painting what's on the floor, or the bed, I guess you would call it a bed, a stream bed. We're going to paint those things first before we paint the water. So we have to think about what's underneath and build to what's on top. Okay, do we have enough of our middle value? I think I'm going to go with one more layer, and I'm going to go with this yellowy ochre color. A couple reasons. I actually see it in some of the rocks, but I see a lot of it in the stream bed. So I want what's happening on the stream bed to be also shown in what's above the water, just to connect them. It's really visible in the water. I'm going to go ahead and put it in there while I have it in my hand. All right, I think that's going to be good. Now, I'm going to let us go and add some color into the light areas, the sunlit areas. Now remember, we talked about this, especially this rock, has more of a dappled light, really. I'm going to pretend that that tree is not making the light quite as dappled, because I think it'll be more interesting. So I'm going to fully illuminate the top with this nice pale value yellow. And it kind of goes over on its side. Where else are we getting light on the rocks? Some of these rocks here, definitely the rocks in the water, definitely this guy here in the water. This got these rocks on the ground. These are in the shadows. What about the rocks in the distance? Some of the rocks over on the opposite bank are picking up a little bit of light. Okay, so now we've established the three values and layering the color. I could probably do one more layer of color on the lit areas of the rocks. This is a very, very pale violet, almost white, but not quite. I'm going to use it and layer it with the yellow, just so that I have a variety in my lights. I use purple in the shadows, I use purple in the middle value areas, and now I'm using purple in the sunlit areas. So if we can tie all those together, then it works. The problem with that light is it's too cool, right? So I'm going to have to come back and warm it up, because sunlight should feel warm, and that purple is a little too cool, so we will adjust it. I just looked down at my tray and saw that I pulled out some very light green. So I'm going to add some of that light green because I saw it in the rocks just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so we're starting to have the rocks come together, okay? What I'm going to do now is work on the background, and then we'll come in and start putting in the water. Then we will come to step 6, which is refine the rocks. But because this painting has more than rocks, what I want to do is build up what's around it, and then we'll come and refine the rocks a little bit. So I will be right back. Okay, so I took a break, got some water, and now I'm ready to tackle the rest. While I took a break, Michael said, you know, this is like the hardest one for me to follow. And I get it, because this is hard to teach as well as follow, because we have so many things going on at once, right? We've got rocks, we've got sunlight and shadow, we've got big rocks versus small rocks, we've got shallow water, we got it all here. So I'm trying to simplify and just say, okay, if we can just go back to this list of 6 things, you know, we hopefully are not going to get lost. But I get it. It's not the easiest thing to follow. What I'm doing now is I'm blocking in the distant foliage with the idea that this painting is not about the foliage. So I just really need a color field of greens, but I do want to hint at the fact that there's some sunlight hitting some of this green. Where? Well, look at the light is hitting the rocks here, so wouldn't the foliage right above it be getting some light? Right, so that's how I know where I'm going to put the light. There's light on these rocks, so wouldn't the foliage near these rocks be more sunlit? That's where I'm going to put the sunlight. In fact, I can get it even a little bit warmer with a yellow-green. But again, it's not about this foliage, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. While I'm back there, however, before I forget, I see that there's a couple of little rocks back there that have some sunlight. I'm just going to put them in just because I see them and I want to take care of them while they're on my mind. Okay, I'm going to tap them down. I want to push them back a little bit further. So where are we? Let's do the water, and then we'll come back and refine the rock. So remember, we talked about the shallow water, you paint what's underneath, then you're going to paint the watercolor, the color of the water. Then you're going to paint any ripples or anything floating on top or anything shadowed. So that means we're going to start with the pebbles that are underneath, and we see that there's a few that are a little bit lighter. So I'm going to kind of hit some of these pebbles under the water with some of the lighter yellow ochre. Now, this is really interesting. Why is this water green and why is it kind of yellowy? Well, it's reflecting the color of the rocks and it's reflecting the color on the trees. That's why you see it as green. So we're going to do 2 things here. I'm going to make horizontal marks for this distant water, and where we see some of the sunlit green, I'm going to add some of that in, and I'm going to just kind of pull those reflections down into the water and then make my green marks, that's the right green, go across. All right, I hope that made sense. It's green because it's reflecting all the green trees that are behind it. Now here's the fun part, the water coming over the waterfall. So in the shadows, that water, I didn't even pull watercolor out. Let's see, we can do it though. The water in the shadows is going to be a cooler, slightly darker blue. So I'm going to use that blue-gray that I used for some of the rocks. I want to use this blue for all the water, and then I'll hit it with the light. But I don't want it to be perfectly even. Like, I want to show some of the rock. And this is, we talked about intervals. So we want the water to look like it has, I'm making marks go over the rock, but I want there to be rock showing, but I don't want it to be too evenly spaced, right? So we're going to have water, rock, rock, but I want there to be a variety in how I place it. And then when it hits the ground, it's in the shadows a little bit, so let's put that in there. But you might be saying, but wait a minute, Karen, that water is getting some sunlight, so it actually is not quite so blue. So I'm going to hit it with a little bit of a lighter value of that same blue. Notice I'm making my marks spill over the water the way it is traveling over those rocks. Now, it's even lighter in some of the areas. In fact, it's a different color blue, which I neglected to pull out. So excuse me just a second. I need to grab a couple of pastels over here. Okay, I'm back. That was a blue-gray. This is more of a ultramarine blue. I'm going to just use it. And I'm making some linear marks to represent some of the smaller bits of water. And where it comes in the shadows of the rocks, I use it there, but then it emerges into the light, so I'm using a lighter value, blue. And it's hitting a little bit of, it's getting a little bit of light in some of the areas. And then the fun part is where it really gets the sunlight. I'm going to use a pale yellow for the sunlit water. A little bit there, a little bit on the actual waterfall where it's getting some of the light. Okay, so we've got the waterfall going on. Now what about the water in this lower section? We have established the pebbles underneath. Now let's look at the color of the water. It's kind of yellowy green. Let's try it. So we're going to go very lightly with a yellow green. I'm going to hold it up so you can see it. And I'm going to do a very, very light touch and just barely cover my pebbles. It's really an illusion. I'm going to press a little bit harder where it gets a little bit turbulence. We also see kind of a golden color in the water down here, especially where it's sunlit. So I'm going to very, very lightly put this color over the pebbles. Now there's shadows, and the shadows are a darker green. So let's take a darker green. This is a darker cool green. And very light touch go over where we see the shadows on the water. And I'm actually going to blend this with my finger just to make it a little bit smoother. Shadows right underneath there where the turbulence is. I want to just kind of break up that water where it's in the stream. And now, how are we going to make these rocks look like they're above water and these underwater? So what we have to do is refine. So now we're at the refined stage. So I'm going to reinforce the dark of this guy here, and a little bit more on this guy, and reinforce the light, and I'm going to press harder so that I can get a nice hard edge, because the hard edge is we're going to look at. I need to. That one's in the further back, so we don't need to be as precise with it. Now, we want it to look like there's water flowing around this rock, so I'm going to take a little bit of blue. This is with a hard pastel, so I can get some linear marks. And I'm going to put a little bit of current line around the rock, and I'm going to just add a hint of blue. The reason why is because we know there's blue up in the sky, so there's a little bit of reflection of the blue, and if I can put some of these current lines in the water, then we can see what's underneath, what's on top, and what's finally on the very top of the water. I hope that makes sense. So that's how you do rocks under the water, rocks above the water, and what we need to do now is lead the viewer through the painting by refining some of these rocks. So I'm going to come in now, just add a little bit more clarity and detail to some of these rocks. This guy's still wanting to be a flat potato, so we need, you know, partly is I'm looking at its shape, and its shape in real life is that shape, and I'm doing a fairly good job painting that shape, but I have to stop and say, but Karen, really, is that a good shape? Maybe it's not the best shape to try to copy. You might want to mix it up a little bit. That's what I'm telling myself. And so, like, well, how can I mix it up a little bit? Well, maybe you need to have a better shape. Huh? It's a baked potato. Well, it's good. I'm glad I'm getting potato because this is what we all struggle with. And that means we all struggle with it. I'm going to darken the back edge of it just a little bit more. And also I'm going to pull a little bit of this out so that it looks like it's got a piece jutting out right here, so that it's not just one. Give that some light. And then jut that out here as well. It's not easy making something not a baked potato. That's a little bit better. That's a little bit more angular. One thing, you know, don't be afraid to change things. And I'm not going to make an excuse for myself, but the fact is, when you are trying to do a demo and try to talk your way through something, normally what I would be doing is, at this stage, is working very slowly and stepping back frequently so that I can really see what's going on. One thing that I want to do here is, because I've neglected this corner, partly it's okay to neglect it because it's not important, but I need to address it somehow, and I really want to make it look as if there were, I'm going to make another rock in here. That actually might help my, it's in the shadow. That might help my situation over here. Just add a few more rocks. One thing that I learned from Albert Handel, I'm going to be sharing some of that information with you, but he talks about how you can stack rocks in front of one another, and then they are stronger. So here what I'm doing is I'm adding a few more rocks and kind of stacking them together. So I'm making I think a better jumble. I like that there's just grass down here, and just hint at some grass. Again, it's outside of my oval of interest, so I don't really need it to have a lot of detail. In fact, I'm going to just soften it right in here. Now, what about the rocks over here in the background? The most important rock I need to address is this guy here, the flat rock, because it is affecting the waterfall. So I just need to give a little bit more detail to it. But I'm perfectly fine with the rest of them being slightly out of focus. Again, they're in the distance. We know they're rocks. If we know this is a rock, we know those are rocks in the distance. So I think we can actually get away with it. I'm going to just add just a little bit of a current line back there so that you can see that that's the bank. And I'm going to use the harder pastel to kind of reinforce the spill of the water. And I look that there's a little bit of water coming from underneath that rock. Reinforce the dark shadow shape. And the last thing I'm going to do, and then I'm going to stop this particular demo, is I'm going to take out my Russian pastels that I've reviewed, and I'm going to use them to further refine the rocks and to create some linear marks that help define the shape to give them a little bit more interest. So I don't want to outline them necessarily, but I do want to give them some cracks and crevices here just a little bit. Just play with the linear quality of these rocks a little bit back in here. Not too much. Again, suggest and let the viewer do the rest. And I think if you can do that, if you can allow yourself to suggest detail, you're going to have more successful rocks. I might take out some green. Let's just add a few blades of grass. Again, so your eye kind of picks up down here and starts moving around. I think I could probably highlight the water a little bit better. Oh, bless you. Where it's getting some of the light. And I think I'm going to stop for now. Got to step back, got to look at it, but I hope that you have seen that even something that seems simple is actually quite complicated, but if we can simplify it by looking at the shapes, deciding where the light is coming from, where are the planes, assign them a value, dark, middle, light, layer your color to get interesting color, and finally refine, add detail where you want the viewer to look. That was a tough one, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and let's have fun and let's paint.